There are some nights that don't feel dangerous in the beginning. No warning, no obvious threat, no reason to think you're about to remember that night for the rest of your life. Just a routine drive home, a quiet apartment, a normal favor, a house that feels safe because it always has. And maybe that's what makes stories like these so disturbing, because none of them started with panic. None of them started with screaming. They started the way most bad nights do, with something small, a sound where there shouldn't be one, a stranger who lingers a little too long, a face that appears in the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. The kind of moment your brain tries to explain away, the kind of moment you tell yourself is probably nothing, until you realize someone has already been watching, already been waiting, already gotten closer than they ever should have. These are 3 more true horror stories about strangers who got a little too close, and the people who barely made it out. If you're alone right now, this might be the kind of video that makes you check your windows, maybe your locks, maybe that dark hallway behind you that suddenly feels a little longer than it did a minute ago. Because the stories in this video aren't about monsters. They aren't about haunted houses, curses, or things hiding under the bed. They're about real people. The kind of people you could pass at a gas station, hold the door for at a store, or notice standing outside your home and immediately regret noticing at all. That's what makes this kind of fear different. Supernatural horror gives you distance. It lets you remind yourself that none of it is real. But a stranger, a patient stranger, a stranger who has decided to wait for the right moment, that kind of horror follows you into everyday life. So, if you get a bad feeling during this one, don't ignore it. Let's get into it. This happened in the fall of 2022 when I was working front desk at a dental office in the downtown area of a mid-sized city. The job itself was fine, nothing unusual. Mostly scheduling, checking patients in, answering phones, dealing with insurance problems, and closing up near the end of the day. The only part I hated was the parking situation. Employees had to park in a public garage across the street because the private lot behind the office only had a few spaces, and those were reserved for patients and the dentist himself. During the day, it wasn't that bad. The garage was busy enough that even if it felt a little gloomy, there were always enough people around to make it feel normal. At night, though, it was different. The office closed at 8, but closing duties usually kept me there until around 9 or 9:30. By then, most nearby businesses were shut down, the sidewalks were mostly empty, and the garage felt like a giant concrete echo chamber. It had 6 levels. I usually parked on level 4 because it was cheaper than parking lower down, and after a while, I got used to it. Still, every time I took the stairwell up there late at night, I had that same uncomfortable feeling, like I was entering a place no one should really be in alone. Everything echoed. Shoes against concrete, a car door closing somewhere far away, the low mechanical hum of the fluorescent lights. Even your own breathing sounded louder than it should. That night, I left the office around 9:20. I remember it clearly because I had texted my sister at 9:17, telling her I was finally leaving and would call her once I got home. She lived in another state, and we talked on the phone a few nights a week while I drove home. It had become a habit. She knew I hated the garage, so sometimes I'd call her before I even got to my car. That night, I didn't. I crossed the street, went into the garage stairwell, and started walking up to level 4. I was tired, my feet hurt, and all I wanted was to get home, shower, and go to bed. When I opened the stairwell door onto the 4th level, I immediately noticed how empty it was. Only a few cars were left. Mine, a dark blue sedan, was parked near the far wall, about halfway down the row. 2 other cars were on the opposite side. And then there was a white cargo van parked 2 spaces away from mine. That van caught my attention right away, but not because it looked dramatic or sinister. It was just wrong in that space. It was an older van, no company logo, no side windows, no noticeable markings, just plain white, slightly dirty, with a dent near one of the rear doors and dark tape around part of the back bumper, like somebody had tried to patch it instead of fixing it. I remember thinking it was weird because I didn't remember seeing it that morning. But I also knew people came and went all day, and it was a public garage, so I didn't let myself dwell on it. I kept walking. My footsteps echoed out ahead of me. The garage felt colder than it had outside, and I remember having that stupid, embarrassing thought a lot of people probably have in situations like that. Don't be dramatic. Just get in your car. I clicked my key fob. My headlights blinked. The sound bounced off the concrete. And then I heard something else. A soft, metallic shift. Not loud, not sudden, just the sound of metal moving against metal. I turned. One of the rear doors of the white van was cracked open, only a little, maybe 3 inches. I stopped walking. At first, I honestly thought maybe I had missed it before. Maybe it had already been open and I just hadn't noticed. But the longer I stared at it, the more that explanation stopped feeling right. I would have noticed an open van door. It was facing right toward the path I had walked, and I felt very strongly that it had not been open until that exact second. I stood there for a moment, holding my bag tighter against my side, and just listened. Nothing. No footsteps, no voice, no movement. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed softly. Somewhere on another level, a car alarm chirped once and then stopped. But around me, there was nothing. I told myself someone was probably in the van looking for something. Maybe a maintenance worker, maybe somebody sleeping in it, maybe somebody loading equipment. And yet, none of those explanations made me feel any better. I turned back to my car, unlocked it, and opened the driver's door. That was when I heard breathing. Not behind me, not far away, inside the van. It was faint, but once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. Slow, human, close enough that it felt like the inside of my chest tightened around it. I slammed my car door shut without getting in and stepped back. A voice came from inside the van. "Hey." Just that. Low, calm, male. I didn't answer. A few seconds passed. Then the voice said, "Can you help me for a second?" I remember the exact feeling that went through me then. It wasn't full panic yet. It was something stranger, like my body had reached a conclusion before my mind did. Every instinct I had said no. Not "no, I can't help," not "no, I'm busy," just no. I took a step backward and said, "I'm late, sorry." Then I started walking away from my car back toward the stairwell. Behind me, the van door opened wider. I didn't turn around immediately. I was too afraid of what I'd see. But I could hear the hinge creak, and then I heard shoes hit the concrete. Footsteps, slow ones. Not running, not calling after me, just walking. That somehow made it worse. I glanced over my shoulder. A man had stepped out from the back of the van. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s. Medium build, dark hoodie under a jacket. He had a baseball cap pulled low, and even from that distance, there was something deeply wrong about how relaxed he looked. Like this was normal, like he had expected this moment to happen. He lifted one hand slightly and said, "It'll only take a second." I said nothing and kept walking. He matched my pace, not exactly chasing, but not staying put either. That was when I broke into a fast walk toward the stairwell door, and the second I did, his pace changed too. He started walking faster. Then I heard him say, in a voice that was no longer pretending to be casual, "Hey." I ran. I grabbed the stairwell handle and nearly slipped, pulling it open. Once I got inside, I let it slam shut behind me and started rushing down the stairs so fast I almost missed a step. I could hear my own breathing, hear my shoes smacking against the concrete steps, hear the blood pounding in my ears. Then I heard the stairwell door above me open. He had followed me in. I looked up. He was at the top of the flight, already coming down, fast. At that point, something in me switched from fear to pure survival. I wasn't even thinking clearly. I just knew I couldn't let him get close. I took the stairs 2 at a time and got down to level 2 before I almost collided with another person coming up. It was a man in a security uniform. I grabbed his arm and started talking so fast I barely made sense. I kept saying there was a man following me. He came out of a van. He followed me into the stairwell. Please don't let him leave. The security guard turned and looked up the stairs. Nobody was there. I kept insisting. I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. The guard went up with me to level 4 while calling for another employee on his radio. When we got back to my level, the white van was gone. So was the man. What remained was my car, and the fact that my driver's side door was open. I know for a fact I had shut it. The interior light was on. My purse, which I had thrown onto the passenger seat before stepping back, was gone. At first, I thought he had stolen it while I was running, but that wasn't the part that bothered me most. The part that bothered me was what the security guard found on the ground beside my car. Zip ties. 3 of them, brand new, heavy duty, lying right near the driver's side rear tire. The guard called police. I gave a statement. They reviewed whatever camera footage they could, but the cameras on level 4 had apparently been having issues for days. The stairwell camera only caught part of the man's face, and even then not clearly enough to identify him. The van's plate wasn't visible either. It had either been removed or covered. They asked if I thought he only wanted my purse. I said no immediately. Maybe that sounds dramatic, but I knew it wasn't about the purse. If he wanted to steal from me, he could have done that 100 easier ways. He had hidden inside the van and waited until I approached my car alone at night. And those zip ties? Those weren't for robbery. For weeks after that, I parked in a different garage and made coworkers walk me to my car. Even then, every time I got in, I locked the doors before I did anything else. No music. No phone, just lock the doors and look around. A month later, police contacted me again. They said a woman in another part of the city had reported a nearly identical encounter in a parking structure. White cargo van, man asking for help, following behavior. She had gotten away because another driver happened to pull in. That was enough to make the whole thing feel worse than it already had. Because then, it wasn't just some random terrifying moment. It was a pattern. Somebody had done this before. Maybe more than once. Maybe successfully. They never told me they caught him. As far as I know, they never did. And sometimes, what still gets to me isn't the fact that he followed me. It's how close I came to acting polite. If I'd stepped closer to the van to see what he needed, if I'd let embarrassment override instinct, if I'd worried more about seeming rude than staying safe, I don't know what would have happened. But I know those zip ties were close enough to my car, and he probably thought he was about to use them. And I know that if the security guard hadn't been coming up those stairs at exactly the right time, I probably wouldn't be telling this story. A few winters ago, my friend Emma invited me and 2 other friends to spend a weekend at her uncle's cabin. The place was about 3 hours north of where we lived, in a wooded area near a small lake that mostly froze over in the winter. It sounded perfect at the time. Cheap weekend getaway, no city noise, no work. Just a quiet cabin, board games, junk food, and a break from everything. There were 4 of us total. Me, Emma, her friend Rachel, and Rachel's boyfriend Tyler. We left on a Friday afternoon and got there just before dark. The cabin itself looked exactly like the kind of place you'd picture in a story that starts out cozy and ends badly. Small wooden structure, covered porch, tall pines surrounding it on every side, a long, narrow driveway leading in from the road. No visible neighbors, no lights anywhere in the distance, just trees, snow, and silence. Emma had the key hidden in a lockbox near the front steps. Her uncle only used the place a few times a year, mostly during fishing season, and told us we'd have it to ourselves. Inside, it was warm enough once we got the heat going. There was a fireplace, a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms, a loft area, and 1 old bathroom that made a whining pipe sound every time the sink ran. The place felt old, but not in a creepy way at first. More like neglected, like it had spent too much time empty. We unpacked, made frozen pizzas, drank a little, and spent the first couple of hours having a genuinely good time. Nothing felt wrong. I think that's important. A lot of scary stories get told in a way that makes it sound like danger is obvious from the beginning, like everyone should have known, like the setting itself was screaming at them to leave. But real fear usually doesn't work like that. At first, we were just 4 people in a cabin laughing over card games while snow fell outside. The first strange thing happened around 10:30. Rachel went to the kitchen window to throw something in the trash and stopped. She asked if one of us had parked another car outside. We all laughed because, obviously, no. Then we walked over. There was no car in the driveway, but there were headlights shining through the trees. Farther back, near the road. Still, low, unmoving. We stared at them for a while, trying to make sense of the distance. The driveway curved enough near the entrance that it was hard to tell exactly where the vehicle was, but it looked like it had either stopped at the end of the property or just beyond it. Tyler said it was probably somebody pulled over checking directions. Emma said there wasn't much signal out there, so maybe they'd stopped because their GPS froze. I remember saying that if they needed help, they'd probably come knock. Nobody did. After maybe 3 or 4 minutes, the lights switched off. Just like that. The trees went dark again. We joked about it after that, but the mood had shifted a little. Not enough to ruin the night, just enough that we were all now listening a bit harder whenever the cabin settled or the wind moved through the trees. Around midnight, Tyler went outside to grab a bag from the car and came back in almost immediately. He said there were footprints in the snow near the side of the cabin. At first, we assumed they were ours, but he said no, these were on the other side of the building where none of us had walked. We all grabbed our phones and looked out through the side windows. He was right. There were prints, a single set. They came from the back tree line toward the cabin wall, stopped beneath one of the windows, then turned and went back the way they came. We just stood there, staring. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. Then Rachel asked the most obvious question. How long had they been there? We didn't know. They could have been old, except the snowfall hadn't covered them much, which meant they were recent. Emma called her uncle. No answer. Tyler said we were probably freaking ourselves out over some hunter or hiker or local idiot cutting through the property. That would have made sense, except for one thing. There was no reason for anyone to stop beneath that window. That window looked directly into the living room, into the room we'd all been sitting in. At that point, we checked all the locks. The front door locked, the back door locked. The windows were old but mostly secure, except one near the bathroom that didn't latch properly and had to be wedged shut with a piece of wood Emma's uncle kept on the sill. We decided to stay up later than planned. None of us said we were scared, but nobody wanted to be the first one to suggest going to sleep. At around 1:15 in the morning, while we were all in the living room pretending to watch a movie, there was a knock at the front door. Not pounding, not desperate, just 3 slow knocks. Every one of us froze.
Please. I hated the way he said it, not because it sounded scary, because it sounded practiced. Emma whispered that she was calling 911. She stepped into the kitchen where the signal was a little better, while the rest of us stood there listening. Then the doorknob moved, very slowly. Just once, just enough to tell us the person outside was no longer asking. Rachel let out a small sound and backed up. Tyler shouted that police were on the way. The doorknob stopped moving. Then we heard footsteps on the porch, slow, measured, not running off, not panicking, just moving across the boards. A second later, something tapped against the living room window. We all turned. A face was there, only for a second, just enough to make out pale skin, dark eyes, and a knit cap pulled low. Then it disappeared. Rachel screamed. Tyler ran toward the window, but by the time he got there, whoever had been outside was already gone from sight. Emma came back from the kitchen looking terrified and said she couldn't get through properly. The call kept dropping. No full signal, no reliable help. That realization changed everything. Suddenly, we weren't just uncomfortable in a remote cabin. We were trapped in one. We shut off most of the lights after that so it'd be harder to see inside. We kept the fireplace low. Tyler found an old hatchet near the woodpile by the back door and kept it with him, which would have looked ridiculous in any normal situation, but didn't then. For the next 40 minutes, nothing happened. And that was almost worse. No more knocks, no footsteps, no voice. The kind of silence that starts making you wonder if maybe you really did overreact. Maybe it was a stranded driver. Maybe he got annoyed and left. Maybe the face at the window had only looked threatening because you were already scared. That's how your brain works when it wants desperately for something terrible not to be true. At around 2 a.m., I went upstairs to the loft to use the bathroom. The loft overlooked part of the living room and had a narrow hallway leading to the bathroom and one of the bedrooms. The bathroom window was the one with the bad latch. When I walked in, the first thing I noticed was that the piece of wood that wedged the window shut was on the floor. I stared at it for a second, not understanding. Then I looked up. The window was open. Only slightly, maybe 4 inches, enough to let cold air in, enough to move the curtain. And on the inside edge of the sill, melting into the paint, was a line of snow. My whole body went numb. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just backed out of the bathroom and called for the others in a voice that didn't even sound like mine. They came running up. Tyler saw the window and swore immediately. Emma started crying, because there was only one reason that window would be open. Someone had opened it from outside, which meant while we were all downstairs watching the front of the cabin, someone had been at the side of the house again, maybe trying to get in, maybe seeing if they already could. Tyler shoved the window closed and jammed it with the wood again, then dragged the small dresser in front of the bathroom door leading from the loft hallway, like somehow blocking interior space would help if somebody made it in. We spent the rest of the night in one room. Nobody slept. Nobody even tried. We stayed in the downstairs bedroom because it had only one small window and a sturdier door. Tyler sat in a chair with the hatchet. Emma kept trying her uncle and eventually got one text to go through that just said, "Call me ASAP, somebody outside." At some point around 4 in the morning, we heard footsteps on the roof. Not many, just 2 or 3 heavy sounds. Then silence. I still don't know how to explain that part. Maybe somebody climbing, maybe snow shifting, maybe the sound carrying strangely, but none of us believed it was harmless. When daylight finally started to show through the curtains, it felt unreal, like we had survived a night that had lasted much longer than it should have. At around 7:30, Emma's uncle finally called back. He drove up with a local sheriff's deputy. When they arrived, the first thing the deputy noticed were tire tracks near the road, not in the driveway, just off it, like someone had parked where they could watch the property without fully pulling in. Then they found multiple sets of footprints around the cabin. Not one set, 3. One by the front porch, one near the living room window, and one along the side leading to the bathroom window. That meant either one person had circled the cabin several times, or there had been more than one person there. Neither option made me feel better. The deputy searched the surrounding area, but didn't find anyone. No abandoned vehicle, no tools, nothing useful. Emma's uncle looked shaken in a way I'd never seen before. Eventually, he admitted something he probably should have told us earlier. A few months before, someone had broken into the cabin while it was empty. Nothing major was stolen, mostly food, blankets, a portable radio. The police assumed it had been transients or local trespassers using empty properties. He hadn't mentioned it because he didn't want to scare us off from going. That explanation should have made things simpler. It didn't. Because if these were just random people looking for a warm place to stay, why knock and pretend to need help? Why watch the house? Why test the doors? Why open a bathroom window upstairs in the middle of the night while 4 people were inside? We left that morning and never went back. For a while, we joked about it in the way people do when they don't want to admit how badly something got to them. But none of us really laughed when it came up. What stays with me most isn't even the face at the window. It's the thought of that bathroom window. The fact that while we were all focused on the front door, while we were all standing together in one room, convincing ourselves we were being careful, someone else was already trying another way in. And if that piece of wood hadn't still been there, if the old frame had opened a little easier, if one of us had already gone upstairs alone and fallen asleep, I don't know if we would have made it to morning with the story ending the same way. This happened when I was 21 years old and living alone for the first time. I rented a small ground floor apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't a bad place, an older building with thin walls, cheap rent, and mostly quiet tenants. Most of my neighbors were working people or elderly residents who had lived there for years. At the time, I worked evening shifts at a grocery store about 15 minutes away. I usually got home between 10:30 and 11 p.m. After a few months, I developed a routine. Every night, I parked in the same spot. I used the same entrance, checked my mailbox on the way in, turned on the kitchen light first, then the living room lamp. I'd shower, make tea, watch TV for a little while, and go to bed. It was comfortable. What I didn't realize was how predictable it made me. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday. When I came out of work, I found a note tucked beneath my windshield wiper. It was written on a torn piece of lined notebook paper. It read, "You left your dome light on last night. Just looking out." There was no name or apartment number. At first glance, it seemed friendly, but something about it bothered me, because I hadn't left my dome light on, and because whoever wrote the note had apparently been watching my car late enough at night to notice whether the interior light was on. I looked around the parking lot expecting someone to claim responsibility. Nobody did. I threw the note away and tried not to think about it. The next night, another note appeared. This one was wedged between my apartment door and the frame. It said, "You should be careful getting home this late by yourself." My stomach dropped. That wasn't neighborly. That was a warning. Whoever wrote it knew where I lived. They knew I came home late. They knew I was alone. I contacted the apartment office the following morning. They told me to call the police if I felt threatened. I called the non-emergency line. The officer I spoke with said there wasn't much they could do about anonymous notes unless the situation escalated. So I bought pepper spray and started paying closer attention whenever I came home. For several days, nothing happened. Then on Friday night, I found my welcome mat slightly out of place. Underneath it was another note. This one said, "I like your blue robe." I felt sick. The robe never left my apartment. That meant whoever wrote the note had seen me inside, maybe through the living room window, maybe through my bedroom blinds, maybe more than once. The blinds in that apartment were cheap plastic things that never fully closed. During the day, it wasn't noticeable, but at night, when the lights were on, anyone outside could probably see shadows moving around inside. I rushed indoors, locked the door, and switched off every light. Then I called 911. An officer arrived, collected the notes, and searched around the building. Unfortunately, there were no cameras and no witnesses. He told me the same thing the other officer had. Without evidence or direct threats, there wasn't much they could do. That weekend, I stayed at my cousin's house. When I returned, everything seemed normal. No notes, no disturbances. For a few days, I convinced myself that the police visit had scared the person away. I was wrong. The following Wednesday, around 2 in the afternoon, someone knocked on my door. 3 quick knocks. I looked through the peephole and saw a man holding a package. He wore a dark jacket and a baseball cap. At first glance, he looked like a delivery driver. I opened the door only a few inches. "Can I help you?" I asked. He glanced down at the package. There was no shipping label, no company logo. Then he looked back at me. "This is for you," he said. Something immediately felt wrong. I asked who it was from. "A friend." His smile was small and unsettling. I told him I wasn't accepting it. For a moment, his expression changed. Not anger, irritation, as though I had ruined a simple plan. Then he nodded. "Okay." He turned and walked away. I locked the door immediately. A few seconds later, I peeked through the blinds. He hadn't left. He was standing near the corner of the building, holding the box, and staring toward my apartment, just waiting. I called 911 again. By the time officers arrived, he was gone. That night, I stayed somewhere else. My manager adjusted my schedule for a while so I wouldn't have to come home so late. But eventually, things returned to normal. Then came the night that still haunts me. I got home just after 11. The parking lot was quiet. As I walked toward my building carrying 2 grocery bags, I noticed something unusual. My kitchen light was on. Fear shot through me instantly. I always turned that light off before leaving. Always. I stopped walking. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I was tired. Maybe. Then I noticed my front door. It wasn't completely closed. There was a thin black gap between the frame and the door, about an inch wide. My heart started pounding. I dropped one of the grocery bags and backed away. Instead of approaching, I called 911. The dispatcher told me to stay where I was and keep my distance. Then something happened that confirmed my worst fear. The door slowly opened. A man stepped outside. The same man with the package. Even from across the parking lot, I recognized him. Dark jacket, baseball cap, calm posture. He stood there looking around, not confused, not surprised, scanning, searching, looking for me. I immediately ducked behind a row of mailboxes. The dispatcher kept asking questions while I whispered updates. Through a narrow gap, I watched him move through the lot. He wasn't running. He wasn't panicking. He was walking between cars and looking toward the places where I normally appeared, toward my parking space, toward the entrance, toward my routine. That realization terrified me. If I had walked straight to my apartment like I always did, he would have been waiting. Inside, alone with me. I stayed hidden until I heard sirens approaching. The moment he heard them too, he changed direction. He disappeared between two buildings and vanished into the darkness before officers arrived. Police searched my apartment. Nothing significant had been stolen, but it was obvious someone had been inside for a while. My closet doors were open. Bathroom cabinets had been searched. The drawer beside my bed had been pulled out, and sitting on the kitchen counter was one final note, folded neatly in half. It read, "You weren't supposed to see me yet." I moved out less than 2 weeks later. Police never identified him. No useful fingerprints were found. No security cameras captured a clear image. Nobody recognized the description. However, one elderly woman living across the courtyard told officers she had seen a man sitting in a parked car near my building several nights a week for over a month. She assumed he was visiting someone. He rarely got out while she was watching. That detail still disturbs me the most, because it means he wasn't acting on impulse. He was studying me, learning my schedule, watching my habits, memorizing my routine. And eventually, he became comfortable enough to enter my apartment and wait. People often ask why that final note scared me more than all the others. The answer is a single word: yet. You weren't supposed to see me yet. That means he had a plan, a future moment, a better opportunity. And if I hadn't noticed that kitchen light from across the parking lot that night, I don't think I would have received another warning. I think I would have unlocked my own door, stepped inside, and finally met the man who had spent weeks learning every detail of my life.